you? I leaned close to see. It was a very small scab, smaller than my smallest fingernail, but my father was frowning. You will fix it by tomorrow. My sisters bobbed their heads. Of course, we are so sorry. We stepped again into the chariot, and my father took the silver-tipped reins. My sisters pressed the last few kisses to his hands, and the horses leaped, swinging us through the sky. The first constellations were already peeping through the dimming light. I remembered how my father had once told me that on Earth were men called astronomers, whose task it was to keep track of his rising and setting. They were held in highest esteem among mortals, kept in palaces as counselors of kings, but sometimes my father lingered over one thing or another and threw their calculations into despair. When those astronomers were hauled before the kings, they served and killed as gods. My father had smiled when then he told me. It was they observed, he said. Helios' son was bound to no will of his own, and none might say what he would do. Father, I said that day, are we late enough to kill astronomers? We are, he answered, shaking the dazzling reins. The horses surged forward and the world blurred beneath us. Shadows of night smoking from the sea's edge. I did not look. There was a twisting feeling in my chest, like cloth being wrung dry. I was thinking of astronomers. I imagined them, low as worms, sagging and bent. Please, they cried on bony knees. It wasn't our fault. The sun itself was late. The sun is never late, the kings answered from their thrones. It is blasphemy to say so. You must die. And so the axes fell and chopped those pleading men in two. Father, I feel strange. You are hungry, he said. It is past time for the feast. Your sisters should be ashamed of themselves for delaying us. I ate well dinner, yet the feeling was good. I must have had an odd look on my face, for Perses and Pasiphae began to snicker from their couch. Did you swallow a frog? No, I said. This only made them harder, rubbing their limbs on each other like snakes pushing their scales. My sister said, and how were our father's golden ears? Beautiful. Perses laughed. He doesn't know. Have you ever heard of anyone so stupid? My sister said. I shouldn't have asked, but I was still drifting my thoughts, seeing those severed bodies sprawled on marble floors. What don't I know? My sister's perfect face. And he fucks them, of course. That's how he makes new ones. He turns into a bull and size the calves and the ones that get old. And that's why everyone thinks they are mortal. He does not. They howled, pointing at my reddened cheek. The sound drew my mother. She loved my siblings' japes. We're telling Circe about the cows, my brother told. She didn't know. My mother's laughter, silver as a fountain down its rocks. Stupid Circe. Such were my years then. I would like to say that all the while I waited to break out. But the truth is, I'm afraid I might have put it on, believed the dull miseries were all there was, until the end of days. Chapter 2. It came that one of my uncles was going to be punished. I had never seen him, but I heard his name over and over in my family's doomy whispers. Prometheus. Long ago, when mankind was shivering and shrinking in their caves, he had defied the will of Zeus and brought them the gift of fire. From its flames had sprung all the arts and profits of civilization that jealous Zeus had to keep from their hands. For such rebellion, Prometheus had been sent to live in the world's deepest pit until a torment could be devised. And now Zeus announced the time was come. My other uncles ran to my father's palace, beards flapping, feathers spilling from their mouths. They're a lovely group, rivermen with muscles like the trunks of trees, brine-soaked gods with crabs hanging from their beards, strict old-timers with seal meat in their teeth. Most of them were not uncles at all, some sort of grand cousin. They were titans like my father and grandfather, like Prometheus, remnants of the war among the gods, those who were not broken or in chains or had made their peace with Zeus's thunderbolts. There had only been titans once, at the dawning of the world. My great-uncle Kronos had heard a prophecy that his child would one day overthrow him. When his wife, Rhea, birthed her first babe, he tore it damp from her arms, swallowed it whole. 4 more children were born, and he ate them all the same, till, at last, in desperation, Rhea swaddled a stone and gave it to him to swallow instead. Kronos was deceived, and the rescued baby, Zeus, was taken to Mount to be raised in secret. When he's grown, he rose up indeed, taking the thunderbolt from the sky, and forcing poisonous herbs down his father's throat. His brothers and sisters, living in their father's stomach, were vomited forth. They sprang to their brother's side, naming themselves Olympia after the great peak where they set their thrones. The old gods divided themselves. Many threw strength to Kronos, but my father and grandfather and Zeus. Said it was because Helios always hated Kronos, wanting pride. Others whispered that his prophetic gift gave him foreknowledge of the outcome of the war. The battles rent the skies, the air itself burned, and gods clawed flesh from each other's bones. The land was drenched in boiling gouts of blood, so potent that rare flowers sprang up where they fell. At last, Zeus's strength prevailed. He clapped those who defied him into chains. The remaining titans he stripped of their powers, bestowing them on his brothers and sisters and the children he had bred. My uncle Nereus, who once was the mighty ruler of the sea, was now lackey to his new god Poseidon. My uncle Proteus lost his palace, and his wives were taken for slaves. Only my father and grandfather suffered no diminishment, no loss of place. The Titans sneered. Were they supposed to be grateful? Helios and Oceanus had turned the tide of war, no one knew it. Zeus loaded them with new powers, new enlightenment, but he was afraid, with their strength already matched his own. They looked to my father, waiting for his protest, the blaring of his great fire. But Helios returned to his halls beneath the earth, far from Zeus' sky-bright gaze. Centuries had passed, the earth's wounds had healed, and the peace had held. The judges of gods are as deathless as their flesh, and on feast nights my uncles gathered close at my father's side. I loved the way they looked in their eyes when they spoke to him, the way they were silent and attentive when he shifted in his seat. The wine bowls emptied and the torches waned. It has been enough, my uncles whispered. We are strong again. Think what your fire might do if you set it free. You are the greatest of the old, greater even than Oceanus, greater than Zeus himself, if only you would. My father smiled. Brothers, he said, what talk is this? Is there not smoke and savour for all? Zeus does well enough. Zeus, if he had heard would have been satisfied. But he could not see what I saw plain on my father's face. Unspoken, hanging words. This use does well enough for now. My uncles rubbed their hands and smiled back. They went away, bent over their hopes, thinking what they could not wait to do when Titans ruled again. It was my first lesson. Beneath the new familiar face of things is another that waits to tear the world in two. Now my uncles were crowding into my father's hall, rolling in fear. Prometheus' sudden panic was a sign, they said, that Zeus and his kind were moving against us at last. The Olympians would never be truly happy until they destroyed us utterly. We should stand with Prometheus. Or no, we should speak against him, to ward off Zeus' thunderstroke from our own heads. I was in my customary place at my father's feet. I lay silent so they would not notice and send me away, but I felt my chest writhing with an overwhelming possibility. The war revived. Our halls blasted wide with thunderbolts. Athena, Zeus' warrior daughter, hunting us down with the grey spear, a brother and daughter, Ares, by her side. We were chained and cast into fiery pits from which there was no escape. My father spoke calm and golden at their centre. Come, brothers, if Prometheus is to be punished, it is only because he has earned it. Let us not chase after conspiracy. But my uncles fretted on. The punishment is public. It is an insult, a lesson they teach us. Look what happens to Titans who do not obey. My father's light had taken on a keen white edge. This is the chastisement of a renegade and no more. Prometheus has led astray by his foolish love for mortals. There is no lesson here for Titan. Do you understand? My uncles nodded. Their faces, disappointment brimmed with belief. No blood. Now. The punishment of a god was a rare and terrible thing. Talk ran wild through our halls. Prometheus could not be killed, but there were many hellish torments that could take death's place. Would it be knives, or swords, or limbs torn off, red-hot spikes, or a wheel of fire? I had swooned in each other's laps. The river lords postured, faces dark with excitement. You cannot know how frightened gods are of pain. There is nothing more foreign to them, and so nothing they ache more deeply to see. On the appointing day, the doors of my father's receiving hall were thrown open. Huge torches carbuncled with jewels glowed from the walls. Their light gathered nymphs and gods of every variety. The slender dryads flowed out of the forests, and the stony Orids ran down from their crags. My mother was there with the night sisters, the horse-shouldered gods crowded in beside the fish-white sea nymphs and their lords of salt. Even the great Titan, my father, of course, and Oceanos, but also shape-shifting Proteus and Nemesis of the sea, my aunt Lean, who drives her silver horses across the night sky, and the four winds led by my ice uncle Boreas. 1,000 avid eyes. The only ones missing were Zeus and his Olympians. They disdained underground gatherings. The word was that they had already held their private session of torment in the clouds. Charge of the punishment had been given to a Fury, one of the infernal goddesses of vengeance who dwell among the dead. My family was in its usual place of preeminence, and I stood at the front of that great throng, my eyes fixed upon the door. Behind me, the Naiads and the river gods jostled and whispered. "I hear they have serpents for hair. No, they are scorpion tails and eyes dripping blood." The doorway was empty. Then, at once, it was not. Her face was grey and pitiless, as if cut from living rock, and from her back dark wings lifted, jointed like a vulture's. A forked tongue flicked from her lips. On her head snakes writhed, green and thin as worms, weaving living ribbons through her hair. "I bring the prisoner!" Her voice echoed off the ceiling, raw and baying, like a hunting dog calling down its quarry. She strode into the hall. In her right hand was a whip, its tip rasping faintly as it dragged along the floor. In her other hand stretched a length chain, and at its end followed Prometheus. He wore a thick white blindfold and the remnants of a tunic around his waist. His hands were bound and his feet too, yet he did not stumble. I heard an aunt beside me whisper that the fetters had been made by the great gods of smiths, Hephaestus himself, so not even Zeus could break them. The Fury rose up on a vulture wings and drove the manacles high into the wall. Prometheus dangled from them, his arms drawn taut, his bones showing knobs through the skin. Even I, who knew so little of discomfort, felt the ache of it. My father would say something, I thought. Or one of the other gods. Surely they would give him some sort of acknowledgement, a word of kindness. They were his family, after all. But Prometheus hung silent and alone. The Fury did not bother with a lecture. She was a goddess of torment and understood the eloquence of violence. The sound of the whip was a crack, like oaken branches breaking. Prometheus' shoulders jerked and a gash opened in his side long as my arm. All around me indrawn breaths hissed like water on a hot rocks. The Fury lifted her lash again. Crack! A bloodied strip tore from his back. She began to carve in earnest, each blow falling on the next, peeling his flesh away in long lines that crossed and recrossed his skin. The only sound was the snap of the whip and Prometheus' muffled, explosive breaths. The tendons stood out in his neck. Someone pushed at my back, trying for a better view. The wounds of gods heal fast, but the Fury knew her business and was faster. Blow after blow she struck until the leather was soaked. I had understood gods could bleed, but I had never seen it. He was one of the greatest of our kind, and the drops that fell from him were golden, smearing his back with a terrible beauty. Still, the Fury whipped on. Hours passed, perhaps days. But even gods cannot watch a whipping for eternity. The blood and agony began to grow tedious. They remembered the comforts, the banquets that were waiting on their pleasure, the soft couches laid with purple, ready to enfold their limbs. One by one they drifted off, and after a final lash, the Fury followed, for she deserved a feast after such a work. The blindfold had slipped from my uncle's face. His eyes were closed, and his chin drooped on his chest. His back hung in a gilded tread. I had heard my uncle say that Zeus had given him the chance to beg on his knees for lesser punishment. He had refused. I was the only one left. The smell of ichor drenched the air, thick as honey. The rivulets of molten blood were still tracing down his legs. My pulse struck in my veins. Did he know I was there? I took a careful step towards him. His chest rose and fell with a soft, rasping sound. Lord Prometheus? My voice was thin in the echoing room. His head lifted to me, open, and his eyes were handsome, large and dark, and long-lashed. His cheeks were smooth and beardless, yet there was something about him that was as ancient as my grandfather. I could bring you nectar, I said. His gaze rested on mine. I would thank you for that, he said. His voice was resonant as aged wood. It was the first time I had heard it. He had not cried out once in all his torment. I turned. My breaths came fast out of the feasting hall, filled with laughing gods. Across the room, the fairy was toasting with an immense goblet embossed with the Gorgon's leering face. She had not forbidden anyone to speak to Prometheus. But that was nothing. Her business was offence. I imagined her infernal voice howling out my name. I imagined manacles rattling on my wrists and the whip striking from the air. But my mind could imagine no further than that. I had never felt a lash. I did not know the colour of my blood. I trembled so much I had to carry the cup in 2 hands. What would I say if someone stopped me? But the passageways were quiet as I walked back through them. In the great hall, Prometheus was silent in his chains. His eyes had closed again, his wounds shone in torchlight. I hesitated. I do not sleep, he said. Will you lift the cup for me? I flushed. Of course he could not hold it himself. I stepped forward, so close that I could feel the heat rising from his shoulders. The ground was wet with his fallen blood. I raised the cup to his watched his throat, moving gently. His skin was beautiful, the colour of polished walnut. It smelled of green moss drenched with rain. Bold action and bold manner are not the same. Are you hungry? I asked. I could bring you food. I do not think I will ever be hungry again. It was not piteous, as it might have been in a mortal. We gods eat as we sleep, because it is one of life's great pleasures, not because we have to. We may decide one day not to obey our stomachs, if we are strong enough. I did not doubt Prometheus was. After all those hours at my father's feet, I had learned to nose out power where it lay. Some of my uncles had less scent than the chairs they sat on, but my grandfather, Oceanos, smelled deep as rich river mud, and my father like a searing blaze of just-fed fire. Prometheus' green moss scent filled the room. I looked down at the empty cup, willing my courage. You aided mortals, I said. That is why you are punished. It is. Will you tell me what a mortal is like? Pardon, and that you were not